AK-9 German Shepherd was seen sprinting toward the river at full speed, but when the villagers saw what he was trying to save, they went pale with shock. Isabel had never seen anything like it. The peaceful morning in the village was suddenly interrupted by the sight of a canine German shepherd dashing toward the river, barking frantically. At first, she thought he was simply chasing something, but then she noticed a panic in his movements. The river was dangerously high from recent rains, its murky waters swirling violently. Whatever the dog was after, it was life or death. Isabel's heart pounded as she ran after him, shouting for help. When the other villagers arrived and saw what the K9 was desperately trying to save, their faces turned white with shock. Before we begin, subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications for more incredible stories. The village awoke to the sounds of birds chirping, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery, and the distant chatter of farmers heading to the fields. It was an ordinary morning, with people going about their daily routines. But everything changed in an instant. Isabel was near the village well, carrying a basket of vegetables, when she heard the barking. At first, it was just background noise blending with the morning bustle, but something about it felt different, urgent, desperate. She turned toward the sound and froze. AK-9 German Shepherd was sprinting toward the river, its powerful legs kicking up dust as it bolted past homes and market stalls. Isabel recognized the dog immediately, Rex, the retired police K9. Even though Rex no longer wore his badge, everyone in the village knew him. He had once belonged to an officer who had since moved away, leaving him behind. But the loyalty of AK-9 never fades, and Rex still carried the instincts of a protector. Something was wrong. Rex wasn't just running. He was charging with intent. His ears were pinned back, his tail stiff, and his powerful frame moved with determination. Whatever he had sensed, it was urgent. Isabel's heart pounded as she followed his gaze toward the river. Then she saw it. The river had swelled from recent storms. The usually calm waters were now dark and violent, the current strong enough to drag away anything in its path. Rex reached the bank and let out a series of sharp, frantic barks. His body was tense, his paws shifting as if calculating his next move. Isabel's breath caught. He was going to jump. She dropped her basket and ran. "Rex, stop!" she yelled, but it was too late. The K9 lunged forward, leaping into the raging waters. A collective gasp rose from the villagers who had started gathering. Isabel skidded to a stop at the riverbank, her chest heaving as she searched for Rex in the churning water. "He won't survive in that current," someone cried. Isabel's hands clenched into fists. Rex wasn't reckless. He was a trained K9. If he had jumped, it was because something or someone was in that water. Then she saw it. A shadow beneath the surface, a shape struggling against a merciless current. Isabel's stomach dropped. There was something or someone in the river, and Rex was fighting to save it. "Get ropes! Something to pull them out!" she shouted to the crowd forming behind her. Several men ran back to their homes, while others stood frozen in shock. Rex swam hard against the current, his muscles rippling as he fought the relentless pull of the water. He was heading straight for the shape. Isabel's nails dug into her palms. "Come on, Rex," she whispered. The dog reached the figure and clamped his jaws around it. But when the villagers saw what he had grabbed, they went pale. The air around the riverbank grew eerily still, the only sound being the raging water and the desperate splashes of Rex as he fought against the powerful current. Isabel stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. As the villagers gathered closer, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding before them. Rex had reached the object in the water. His strong jaws clamped down, his teeth securing a firm grip as he began pulling it toward the shore. A collective gasp spread through the crowd. One of the older men, Elias, took a shaky step forward, his face turning pale. "It can't be!" The waves pushed Rex and his burden closer, and now Isabel could see it clearly. It was a bundle wrapped in fabric. Rex growled low in his throat as he fought to keep it above water, using all his strength to push forward. The villagers rushed into action. 3 men waded into the water, the current tugging at them as they reached for the struggling dog. "Hold on, boy," one of them called out. Rex paddled fiercely, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, but he refused to let go of the bundle. He had locked his powerful jaws around it and would not release it until he was sure it was safe. The moment the men grabbed the bundle and pulled it from the water, Rex finally released his grip, panting hard. His mission was complete. Isabel fell to her knees, her hands pressed against her chest as she gasped for breath. What is it? The villagers, too stunned to speak, hesitated as they carefully unraveled the wet fabric. The moment the last layer peeled back, a horrifying silence fell upon them. Inside the soaked fabric was a newborn baby. Isabel gasped. The tiny infant was unmoving, its skin pale, its lips slightly blue from the cold water. The shock was so profound that, for a moment, no one moved. Then the baby coughed, a weak, raspy sound, followed by a shuddering breath. Isabel reacted instantly. Get blankets. We need to warm the baby now. The villagers snapped into action. A woman rushed forward with a thick shawl, wrapping it around the fragile infant, while another man, Tomas, gently lifted the child into his arms. Rex, still catching his breath, let out a soft whimper. His eyes locked onto the baby. His soaked fur clung to his body, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Even in his exhaustion, he would not look away. He saved this child, Elias murmured, shaking his head in disbelief. If not for him, we would have never known. Isabel turned to Rex, kneeling beside him. She cupped his face, brushing the wet fur from his eyes. You're incredible, she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. You're a hero. Rex let out a tired sigh, resting his head against her palm. The realization was sinking in for everyone. Someone had left this baby in the river. Someone had intended for it to never be found. The crowd exchanged looks, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Who could have done this, and why? The baby let out a weak cry, pulling Isabel's focus back to child. It was alive, but barely. They had to act fast. We need to get to the doctor, Isabel said firmly. Tomas nodded, already moving toward the village. Isabel and a few others followed, while some villagers stayed behind, talking in hushed voices. As they hurried toward the doctor's home, Isabel kept looking back at Rex. Despite everything, despite the danger, he had known. Somehow, he had sensed that there was a life in need of saving, and he had risked everything to make sure the baby lived. But one question remained. Who had abandoned this child, and would they try to take it back? Isabel hurried down the dirt path toward the village doctor's house, her breath ragged as she clutched the damp, shivering baby to her chest. The infant's cries were weak, its tiny body trembling from the cold. Every second counted. Rex limped beside her, his wet fur clinging to his body, his deep brown eyes filled with exhaustion, yet unwavering determination. Despite nearly drowning, he kept pace, his instincts refusing to let him stray from the child he had risked everything to save. Tomas led the way, pounding on the doctor's door with urgency. Dr. Valdez, open up now. The door swung open within moments, revealing an elderly man with gray hair and sharp eyes. His gaze flickered from Tomas's frantic expression to Isabel's soaked form and the fragile infant wrapped in a villager's shawl. What happened? Dr. Valdez demanded, stepping aside to let them in. No time to explain. Isabel gasped. The baby was in the river. We need to save it. Dr. Valdez's face darkened as he motioned for her to lay the child on a wooden examination table. He moved quickly, his hand steady as he checked the infant's pulse, pried open its tiny mouth, and listened for breath. The room was filled with a grave silence. Then the baby let out a sudden wail. A wave of relief swept through the room. Isabel let out a choked sob, her knees nearly giving way as she clutched the edge of the table for support. The child is alive, Dr. Valdez confirmed, his voice heavy with urgency, but extremely weak. We need to warm it up immediately. One of the villagers handed him a thick wool blanket, and he carefully wrapped the baby, rubbing its arms and legs to stimulate circulation. He turned to Isabel. How long was the child in the water? I don't know, she admitted. Rex. He was the one who found it. He went straight for the river. At the mention of his name, Rex perked up slightly, though his body trembled from exhaustion. Dr. Valdez glanced down at the K9 and let out a small breath. This dog saved a life today. Tomas ran a hand through his damp hair. Not just any life. Someone tried to get rid of that baby. A heavy silence settled over the group. Isabel swallowed hard, glancing at the infant's peaceful face. Who would do such a thing? She whispered. Dr. Valdez shook his head. That's what we need to find out. Just then, the front door slammed open. Everyone turned as a young woman burst into the room, her face streaked with tears, her clothes muddy and torn. Her eyes landed on the baby, and a cry ripped from her throat. No! She gasped, her hand shaking. My baby! The tension in the room thickened instantly. Isabel's breath hitched as she instinctively stepped between the woman and the infant. Dr. Valdez frowned. Who are you? The woman clutched the doorway for support, her whole body trembling. My name is Clara. Please, that's my baby. I didn't leave her. I swear I didn't. Tomas narrowed his eyes. Then how did your newborn end up floating in a river? Clara let out a strangled sob. Someone took her. I woke up this morning and she was gone. I looked everywhere until I heard people talking in the village about the river. I ran here as fast as I could. Isabel exchanged a glance with Dr. Valdez. Could she be telling the truth? Dr. Valdez studied Clara carefully. You're saying someone stole your baby and left it to drown? Clara nodded desperately, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Yes, please, you have to believe me. The villagers murmured among themselves. Some looked skeptical, others sympathetic. Isabel's gaze flickered to Rex. The K-9 watched Clara with sharp, calculating eyes. He wasn't growling, which meant he didn't sense danger. Rex had been trained to detect lies, threats, and hidden intentions. If Clara was truly responsible for harming her baby, the dog would have reacted by now. Isabel took a deep breath and stepped forward. Clara, if what you're saying is true, then who would do this to you? Clara's face crumpled as fresh tears fell. I don't know. My husband. He doesn't want the baby. He told me we couldn't afford to take care of her, but I never thought he would. She broke off, her voice cracking. Dr. Valdez frowned. Where is your husband now? I don't know, Clara whispered. He left early this morning. When I woke up, the baby was gone. Isabel clenched her fists. If he's the one who did this, then we have to find him. Tomas nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. I'll gather some of the men and search for him. Dr. Valdez turned to Clara. The baby is still in danger. She needs time to recover. You, on the other hand, need to rest. You're in no condition to go anywhere. Clara hesitated, torn between relief and fear. Finally, she nodded, her body sagging as if the weight of the past few hours had finally hit her. Isabel glanced down at Rex, scratching behind his ears. You saved her, boy, but I don't think this is over yet. Rex let out a low whine, as if he understood, because deep down, Isabel knew whoever had done this wasn't finished. The real danger was still out there. The tension in the doctor's office was thick, the weight of Clara's words hanging over everyone like a storm cloud. Isabel felt her pulse quicken as she glanced at the baby, now wrapped securely in warm blankets, sleeping soundly. If Clara was telling the truth, then there was only one real suspect, her husband. Tomas tightened his jaw. We need to find him. If he really did this, we can't let him get away with it. Dr. Valdez nodded. I'll keep the baby here. She needs close monitoring, and I won't risk moving her until she's stronger. Isabel placed a reassuring hand on Clara's trembling shoulder. Stay here. Rest. We'll handle this. Clara looked at her with glassy eyes. Please, just bring him back. I need to know why he did this. Isabel exchanged a glance with Tomas. They both knew there was a chance the man wouldn't come back willingly. Outside, a small group of villagers had gathered, whispering amongst themselves. News spread fast in their town, and already people were forming their own theories. Tomas addressed the crowd. We're looking for Clara's husband. Has anyone seen him today? Murmurs rippled through the group before an older woman, Marta, stepped forward. I saw him early this morning, before sunrise. He was heading toward the old mill. Isabel frowned. The mill? Marta nodded. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder. That was enough for Tomas. Let's go. Isabel hesitated, then turned to Rex. The dog had been quiet, but his eyes were sharp, ears perked. He could sense the tension. "Come on, boy," she said. "We might need you." Rex let out a low bark, falling into step beside her as they set off toward the old mill. The journey wasn't long, but the deeper they walked into the outskirts of the village, the quieter everything became. The mill had been abandoned for years, its wooden frame worn down by time and weather, a perfect place for someone trying to hide. Tomas signaled for silence. As they approached, Rex stopped abruptly, his body tensing. Isabel's breath caught. He smelled something. Tomas motioned for her to stay back as he crept toward the entrance. He barely made it 3 steps before a shadow moved inside, then a crash. "Wait!" Tomas shouted, rushing forward. The figure inside bolted. Isabel caught a brief glimpse of a man, his clothes damp, his face pale. He ran toward the back exit, but Rex was faster. The German shepherd lunged, cutting off the man's path with a deep, commanding bark. The man froze, his chest heaving. Tomas grabbed his arm before he could think of running again. "Going somewhere?" Tomas demanded. The man thrashed, but Tomas held firm. It was Clara's husband. "Let me go," he growled. Tomas shoved him against the mill's wooden wall. "Did you throw your own child into the river?" The man's eyes darted wildly, his breath ragged. I didn't have a choice." Isabel stepped forward, her fists clenched. "No choice? That was your child." He sagged against the wall, his body trembling. "I was told to do it." A heavy silence fell. Tomas's grip tightened. "By who?" The man hesitated. Then a noise from outside made everyone go still. Rex's ears flattened. They weren't alone. Someone else was here, and they had been listening. The tension was suffocating. Isabel's breath hitched as she glanced at Rex, whose body was coiled like a spring. His sharp eyes locked onto something beyond the mill's entrance. He had sensed someone. Tomas tightened his grip on Clara's husband. "Who told you to do this?" The man swallowed hard, his gaze flickering toward the darkened doorway. His hesitation spoke volumes. He wasn't just afraid of being caught. He was afraid of who was watching. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, approached from just outside. Rex let out a low warning growl. Tomas pulled the man aside, keeping a firm hold on his collar. Isabel's pulse pounded in her ears. Who was out there? A figure emerged from the shadows, stepping into the faint moonlight, seeping through the mill's broken walls. An older man, someone familiar. The villagers gasped as they recognized him. "Elias." Isabel whispered, her stomach dropping. The village elder, the man who had always seemed wise and respected, stood before them, his face set in a grim expression. He didn't look surprised to see them. Tomas's grip tightened on Clara's husband. You told him to do this?" Elias exhaled, his fingers curling into fists. "I told him to do what was necessary." Isabel stepped forward, her hands trembling. "You ordered him to throw an innocent baby into the river. How could you?" Elias's face hardened. "You don't understand. That child should not exist." The word sent a shiver down Isabel's spine. Tomas's face darkened. "What are you talking about?" Elias looked at Clara's husband, his gaze sharp. "Tell them." The man hesitated, his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His voice was barely a whisper. "The baby is mine." The revelation struck like a thunderclap. Isabel's breath caught. "What?" Clara's husband looked away, ashamed. She had an affair. The baby belongs to another man. A stunned silence filled the air. Tomas frowned. "And that's why you tried to kill an innocent child." Elias's face remained wed. "The bloodline of this village must remain pure. That child is a disgrace." Rex barked sharply, his stance shifting in defensive aggression. Even he could sense the darkness behind Elias's words. Isabel felt fury burning in her chest. "So, because of that, you decided the baby didn't deserve to live?" Elias's expression remained unmoved. It was for the best. Tomas shook his head in disbelief. "You're a monster." Elias scoffed. But before he could respond, Rex lunged forward. The German shepherd snarled, his teeth bared, his instinct screaming that this man was a threat. Elias stumbled back, and that was when he reached for something beneath his cloak. A knife. Isabel screamed. Tomas reacted fast, shoving Clara's husband aside and moving to disarm Elias. But Elias was faster than they expected. He lunged, and Rex jumped between them. A sharp yelp echoed through the mill. Isabel's heart stopped. Rex had taken the hit. The knife had grazed his side, slicing through fur and skin, but he didn't back down. Instead, the canine launched himself at Elias, knocking him to the ground. Tomas kicked the knife away while Rex stood over Elias, snarling viciously. For the first time that night, Elias looked afraid. Tomas towered over him. You just attacked an innocent man, a woman, and a police-trained canine. You're done, old man. The villagers, who had started gathering outside the mill, rushed in, horrified by what they had witnessed. Elias's reign over their village had come to an end. Isabel dropped to her knees beside Rex, pressing a hand to his wound. You're okay, boy. You're okay. Rex whimpered but licked her hand, as if to tell her he wasn't done fighting yet. The village had almost lost a baby that night, but thanks to Rex, they hadn't. And now, justice would be served. The tension in the mill finally snapped as villagers rushed in. Their faces were a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. Some had known Elias their entire lives, respected him, trusted him, but now they saw who he really was. Tomas kept a firm grip on Elias's arm, his face twisted in disgust. You were willing to let an innocent child die for what? Pride? Reputation? Elias struggled, but Tomas held him tight. His gaze flickered around the crowd, as if searching for someone to defend him. But there was only silence. Isabel pressed her hands against Rex's wound, her heart pounding. The cut wasn't deep, but the sight of his blood sent a wave of panic through her. You're going to be okay, boy, she whispered. Rex let out a tired but determined whine, nudging her hand as if to say, I'm still here. Tomas turned toward the gathered villagers. Elias needs to face the authorities. He tried to kill an innocent child and attacked a man and a police-trained canine. There's no place for him here anymore. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Marta, the elderly woman who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. Her usually kind eyes were hard as steel. I knew you were proud, Elias, but I never thought you were evil. Elias scoffed. You don't understand. I was doing what needed to be done. Marta spat at his feet. No, you were playing God, and you have no right. Two younger men grabbed Elias by the arms, helping Tomas restrain him. He didn't fight anymore. He knew it was over. The villagers parted as Tomas, and the others led him away toward the village center. Justice was finally coming. Isabel turned back to Rex. The sight of blood on his fur made her throat tighten. We need to get you to Dr. Valdez, she said urgently. Rex, exhausted but still standing, let out a small whine of agreement. Clara's husband, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, stepped forward. His face was pale, his hands trembling. I didn't want to do it, he murmured. I swear I didn't. Isabel felt anger rise in her chest. But you did nothing to stop it. The man swallowed hard, glancing toward the villagers. He knew he too would have to answer for his actions. Clara's voice suddenly broke through the chaos. She ran toward the mill, her eyes wild with panic. My baby, where is she? Isabel stood up quickly. She's safe. She's with Dr. Valdez. Relief washed over Clara's face. She let out a choked sob, her legs giving out beneath her. Isabel rushed to catch her, holding her steady. She's alive, Isabel reassured her. Because of Rex. Clara turned toward the injured kind, fresh tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, kneeling beside him. You saved my little girl. Rex's ears flicked, and despite his injury, he licked her hand gently. Even in pain, his mission was never over. The village was quiet again, but everything had changed. Elias had been locked in the town's holding quarters, awaiting transport to the city authorities. Clara's husband had turned himself in, ashamed of what he had done. He would face consequences, but at least he had shown remorse. As for Rex, he lay on a blanket inside Isabel's home, his side carefully bandaged by Dr. Valdez. His deep brown eyes followed Isabel as she moved around the room. You scared me, you know, she murmured, kneeling beside him. Rex huffed, as if unimpressed by her worrying. She smiled softly. You're a hero, boy. His tail wagged weakly. The baby, now safe in Clara's arms, let out a tiny coo. Isabel glanced over, her heart swelling. This could have ended so differently, but because of Rex, because of his courage, his instincts, his loyalty, a life had been saved. As she stroked his fur, Isabel made a silent promise. She would never let him fight alone again. From this day forward, Rex had a home, a real one, forever. 6 months had passed since the night that changed the village forever. The seasons had shifted, and with them, life had resumed its quiet rhythm. But no one had forgotten the events that had nearly stolen an innocent life. The village no longer spoke of Beast except in hushed voices. He had been sentenced to a long prison term, his crimes too severe to be ignored. His influence over the town had crumbled, and with his departure, a new sense of justice and community had taken root. Clara, once a woman filled with fear and uncertainty, had become a symbol of resilience. She had stayed in the village, determined to give her daughter the life she deserved. The baby was no longer known as the child who was thrown away. Her name was Hope. It was a name Clara had chosen for her, a reflection of everything she had survived. On this particular morning, Isabel sat on her small wooden porch, sipping her tea as she watched the golden sunlight spill over the fields. By her side, stretched out in the warmth of the morning, was Rex. His deep brown eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful, ever alert. Though he was retired, his instincts never faded. He had found his place in this village, but more importantly, he had found a home where he was loved, where he was cherished. Isabel smiled down at him and scratched behind his ears. You're not much of a farm dog, are you? She teased. Rex gave a low huff, tilting his head slightly as if to say, I am whatever I need to be. She laughed softly. It was true. Rex had always been a protector first. And now, instead of chasing criminals or tracking down lost souls, he was watching over Hope. A familiar sound echoed from the small house behind them, the baby's laughter. Isabel turned to see Clara stepping outside, holding Hope in her arms. The little girl, now 6 months old, had grown healthy and strong. She had bright eyes full of curiosity, and her tiny hands reached out for everything around her. But no one fascinated her more than Rex. The moment she saw the German Shepherd, her whole face lit up. She squealed in delight, reaching for him. Rex's ears perked up, and he lifted his head. His tail thumped against the wooden porch as he watched the child in Clara's arms. She only does that when she sees him, Clara said with a smile. I think she knows he saved her. Isabel nodded, watching as Hope wiggled in Clara's grasp, trying desperately to get closer to Rex. Clara knelt down and gently set Hope on the porch. The baby crawled forward eagerly, her tiny hands reaching out until she touched Rex's fur. The dog stilled. He watched her carefully, his deep brown eyes unreadable. Then, with the same gentleness that had guided him through every mission, Rex lowered his head and licked her tiny fingers. Hope giggled, clapping her hands in delight. Isabel's heart swelled. This wasn't just any moment. This was trust. Rex had seen the worst of humanity. He had fought battles most people would never understand. He had nearly lost his life for this child, and now he was hers. Hope grabbed onto his fur, pulling herself up clumsily. Instead of moving away, Rex braced himself, letting her hold on to him for support. Clara let out a breathless laugh. She's trying to stand. Hope wobbled, but Rex stood firm, letting her find her balance against him. And for the first time, the little girl took a small, unsteady step. Clara's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes shining with tears. She just took her first step. Isabel whispered, emotion thick in her voice. Right there, next to the dog who had once pulled her from the depths of the river, Hope had taken her first step toward the future. Rex huffed proudly. Isabel wiped at her eyes. Looks like you're not just a hero. Boy, you're a teacher now, too. Rex tilted his head slightly, accepting the compliment. Clara scooped up Hope, spinning her around in pure joy. The baby squealed, her laughter ringing through the crisp morning air. Rex watched them, his tail wagging slowly, as if he knew his job wasn't over. It never would be.